Hello everyone. In this video, I want to talk about how psychology really is a science. A lot of times psychology is criticized as just being common sense or that we already knew that information and we don't really need to research that or study that. But in this video, I'm going to talk about how we use the scientific method to really research ideas in psychology, and also that many times we actually disprove a lot of the common sense ideas that people have. So, is psychology just common sense? Um, so, research often determines that our ideas are inaccurate. Look at these two statements. These are two common sense ideas that we hear a lot about. Birds of a feather flock together and opposites attract. So, which one of these is true? Well, actually, both of them are true. And psychology has researched what attracts us to other people, what helps build long term relationships and long term bonds between people. And what we've discovered truly is that both of these things are actually accurate. So similarities are really important in long-term relationships. Being similar in many areas builds strong bonds between people. So certain things are really important. Certain similarities are really important in long-term relationships. Common values, some common interests. You don't have to have every interest in common, but you have to have some interests in common. Ideas about family, goals in life. All similarities are really important for long-term relationships and stronger relationships. And then what about opposites? We know opposites attract, right? Extroverts tend to be attracted to introverts, and introverts tend to be attracted to extroverts. Extroverts often want to help us introverts come out of our shell and be more fun. um, we know that opposites do attract. We tend to find people in relationships sometimes that are strong in the areas that we might be weak, and vice versa. We might be strong in an area that they're weak, and that actually builds a healthy relationship. We can help somebody who's weak in a particular area that we have strength in. We can help them to become stronger in that area, and in a healthy relationship, you both become better people. So both of these things are actually true, and they have actually been researched by psychologists. So this is an example of how the scientific method works, and you guys have probably seen this in many of your science classes. But we use the same scientific method in psychology that all other scientists use. So maybe if we wanted to test this theory that opposites attract, or that similarity is more important in relationships, we could do that. We could ask a question. So let's ask a question: is opposites attract? Do opposites really attract? We might want to do some background research and see what other research has already been done in this area, so we don't repeat the same research. And then we're going to come up with a hypothesis that yes, opposites definitely attract. And then how are we going to get this information? How are we going to discover whether or not this is true? One of the things we could do is, to make it a little simpler on ourselves, is maybe we go to Match.com and we ask them to look at their data on successful matches and relationships. And then we look at those traits that the people put on there, their likes and their interests and those kinds of things. And we look at, are they really similar? And then we look at, what are they opposite in? And then we take that data and we analyze it. And then we come up with an answer to our hypothesis. And we may find that our hypothesis is true, yes, opposites attract, or we might find that it's false. And we might find that the matches that we looked at have more in common than they do opposite. Especially a lot of times on dating sites, I don't know if they talk about, are you an extrovert or an introvert, but it's usually personality traits that people are opposite in. Other things that are maybe more important, people are much more similar in. So it's an interesting way to really study it and not just guess about what that, about the ideas that we have, just common sense ideas that we have. So the bystander effect is a famous study in psychology, and oftentimes we talk about it in intro courses, and I think it's really interesting. I posted 2 different videos about it. One of them is a 2-minute video about how the bystander effect still occurs today. And then the second one talks a little bit more about the Kitty Genovese case, and also about some of the other research that's been done about bystander apathy. But this was a case that happened in 1968, and this was a young woman coming home home from her job. I think she was a waitress, and she lived in New York City, and she was walking home from her job to her apartment complex, and she was attacked by a man, and she was able to make it to the steps of her apartment complex and, try to ask for help, but she collapsed in the front of her apartment complex and died. And they said 38 other people were around and heard her, this busy time of day. There were tons of other people around, but nobody stopped to help her. Nobody called the police. Nothing happened. And people were just horrified by this story, that nobody would stop and help. And, there were a lot of theories at the time, it's just New Yorkers, I wouldn't act that way, and people from my city wouldn't act that way. And so there was a lot of interest in this story, and psychologists found it interesting too. See, psychologists really want to understand human nature, especially social psychologists. So a lot of research was done on, this particular case and why does this happen. And so what the experimenters did is they staged different scenes in different cities, and kind of looked at, who helped, who didn't help, what were the factors that influenced whether or not somebody helped. And our common sense idea, when we're thinking about helping or being helped or being safe, a lot of times, we think that the more people that are around, the safer we are, right? And the more likely you are to get help. Common sense tells us if there's 50 people around, somebody should stop and help us, right? But what they actually found was the opposite was true, that the more people that are around, the less likely you are to get help. And what they found was that people, when there's a lot of people around, people often don't feel personally responsible to jump in and help. We feel like somebody else will help. There's lots of other people around that can help. So I don't feel personally responsible for it. So we have this sense of diffusion of responsibility. Somebody else can take care of this. I don't have to personally take care of it. Whereas if there's just a couple people around, we recognize that if I don't do something, nobody else is going to do something. And so we feel more responsible, and we do jump in and help. So this was a really horrifying case and really interesting, but it still occurs today. People often don't always recognize that somebody needs help, that it's a dangerous situation, and you'll see that in some of the videos. But there's a lot of other factors too that play into this. It's not just the number of people around, but the number of people around absolutely has an effect. And so it's something to think about if you're ever in a situation where there's a lot of people around and you think there might be something going on, that it's worth it to check it out and try to help. So another one of the experiments that they did here was looking at, is it really just New Yorkers? Are New Yorkers just cold and callous? We have sort of a bias or a stereotype about New Yorkers and what they're like. So are they just callous and uncaring, and would people from different cities, respond differently? So our hypothesis was that, people from other cities would be different. They would be nicer. They would be more willing to help. So we set up an experiment, and we set up scenes where somebody was injured, in different cities, and, observed how many people stopped and helped, and, how many people were around, and all that kind of same thing that we looked at with the other studies. And what do you think they found? Do you think they found that it was different in any other city? No, they found that every city was just the same as New York, that the more people that were around, the less likely you were to get help, and that oftentimes people just don't jump in because of that diffusion of responsibility. So psychology uses research to answer questions scientifically, and oftentimes our common sense ideas are not accurate. We think we know, but we don't always know. And, many of the ideas that we do have actually do come from psychology. When we talk about Freud, childhood affects your adulthood, that's common sense to us today, right? But that we actually learned that from research and from psychology. So in psychology, we build knowledge based on the scientific method, and then we continue to build knowledge by constantly testing new theories, and we also go back and retest old theories as well. So we use the scientific method to study ideas and come up with accurate information about psychological principles. Thanks for listening. We'll talk in the next lecture.